Have you ever met someone who saw through all your armor before you even realized you were wearing any? Imagine asking a stranger for a dance, not knowing he's a millionaire, trying to escape a life built on expectations, not dreams. And what if you were the woman no one expected to matter, yet somehow became the only thing he couldn't walk away from? Kiara was a struggling writer with a past full of silence and survival. Grant was a powerful man who had everything except peace. Their worlds weren't just different, they weren't supposed to touch. So when they did by accident, by instinct, what followed wasn't a fairy tale. It was a question: can love survive when the world tells you you're not enough for it? And more than that, would you choose to stay, knowing you could lose yourself in someone else's story? This isn't about wealth or romance. It's about identity, dignity, and the quiet courage it takes to let yourself be seen. So, if you've ever felt invisible, or loved someone in secret, or walked away because staying scared you more, this story is for you. Like, share, and subscribe to join us for a journey that might just feel a little too familiar. Let's begin. The moment Kiara Thompson stepped into the grand ballroom of the Pendleton Hotel, she knew she didn't belong there. Not in her second-hand navy blue dress with the loose thread at the hem, not with her rain-frizzed hair or her worn-out flats she'd tried to polish in the car. The floor beneath her was marble cold, shining, untouched by real life, and above her, chandeliers glittered like frost caught in mid-air. It was a charity gala, something about community arts funding. Her friend Linda had begged her to come. "Just breathe," Linda had said, applying lipstick in the rearview mirror. "You've had the week from hell. Come inside, have a glass of champagne, and remember that life doesn't end with a pink slip." Kiara wasn't so sure. Her job as a high school literature teacher had vanished in the latest round of budget cuts. No warning, no severance. One small box of books, and goodbye to a decade of lesson plans and students she actually loved. So, yes, the week from hell was putting it mildly. Still, she'd followed Linda inside. She told herself she'd stay by the wall, sip water, and leave before anyone noticed the woman who obviously hadn't grown up with horse stables and summer homes. And then the music started, not piped-in background stuff, but real music, a jazz quartet tucked under an arch of ivy and fairy lights, a brushed snare, the low moan of a cello, and a trumpet that made something in her chest unfold. People began to dance, effortlessly, gracefully, like they'd been born in tuxedos and silk. Kiara edged back, near the terrace doors. She shouldn't have come. This wasn't her world. She was about to turn around and slip out when she saw him. He stood alone, not looking at his phone, not talking to anyone, just watching the dancers like they were a scene from a life he'd once lived but hadn't touched in a long time. He wore a dark gray suit, nothing flashy, but it fit him too well to be anything but expensive. His tie was slightly loosened, his jaw clean-shaven, and there was something about his stillness that caught her. He didn't look bored. He looked wistful. Before her mind could object, her feet moved. She crossed the polished floor like she had every right to be there and stopped a few feet from him. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but steady. The man turned. Up close. He had blue-gray eyes that made her think of storm clouds rolling over the Sound, and the kind of face people would call striking in an understated sort of way. "I know this is a little strange," she added quickly, "but would you dance with me?" His eyebrows lifted slightly. "You don't know me." "No. And I don't expect anything, just one song. I promise not to talk your ear off." There was a moment, a long breath of hesitation, and then he smiled. Not the smirk she expected, but something smaller, gentler. "One song," he said. "I think I can handle that." He offered his hand. It was warm, firm, unhurried. She took it before her nerves could catch up with her mouth. The music swelled, something slower this time, the kind of tune that wrapped itself around your ribs and tugged. He guided her to the floor, one hand on her waist, the other still holding hers. There was enough space between them to breathe, but not enough to hide. "I'm Kiara," she said quietly. He nodded. "Grant, just Grant." No last name, no title. Thanks for saving me from standing alone, she added, her smile apologetic. I doubt you ever look alone, he replied, so low she almost missed it. They danced. Neither of them spoke for a while, and yet it didn't feel awkward. His hand moved with hers like they'd done this a dozen times before, maybe in another life. They had. The song ended, but he didn't let go. Another, he asked, voice rougher now. She nodded. 2 more songs slipped by, the room fading around them. The laughter, the lights, even the tapping heels of other dancers, all background to the quiet world that formed between them. When they finally stepped off the floor, they were breathless. Kiara's cheeks ached from smiling. He led her toward the open terrace. Outside, the Seattle skyline stretched in glinting gold and slate. The air carried a whisper of the rain that had fallen earlier, and she wrapped her arms around herself to keep warm. Let me guess, she said, watching the lights. You're a hedge fund guy, or you build apps, or maybe secretly a senator's son. Grant laughed, low and real, none of the above. Then what do you do? He glanced at her, amused. What do you think I do? She tilted her head, pretending to think. You seem like the kind of man who's either pretending to be rich to impress people, or actually rich, but pretending to be normal. He raised a brow. That's oddly specific. I write. She shrugged. You learn to read people. You're a writer. Trying to be. Mostly I collect rejection emails. There was a pause. A beat of quiet. Then, for what it's worth, he said, you're the most interesting thing I've seen here all night. Kiara's stomach did a small flip. She shook it off. You're good at this. I'm not trying to be. From inside, a voice called, sharp and clipped. Mr. Calloway, we're ready for you. Kiara turned. Mr. Calloway Grant's jaw tensed slightly. Sorry, he said. That's me, Calloway, like Grant Calloway. He nodded once, her breath caught. You're the Grant Calloway Equity, the guy who... Yeah, he said quietly. That one. Kiara stepped back, her voice suddenly smaller. I just asked a millionaire to dance. You didn't know. I liked that. She stared at him, caught between too many feelings. The wind lifted a strand of hair across her face. I should go, she whispered. Kiara. No, it's fine. Thanks for the dance. Good luck with your empire. He watched her leave, the sound of her footsteps fading, her silhouette disappearing into the elevator. Behind him, the ballroom buzzed. His assistant called his name again, but Grant didn't move. He was still watching the door she had walked through, and he already knew he wasn't letting her go that easily. By the time Kiara Thompson got home that night, the rain had picked up again. It tapped gently against the windows of her second-floor walk-up, like a reminder that real life hadn't paused while she was spinning across polished marble with a man she didn't truly know. The apartment was quiet, dim, and too cold. She didn't bother turning on the lights. Just dropped her purse on the small wooden table near the door and kicked off her shoes with a tired sigh. Everything about her place was small. The kitchen barely had room for one person to turn around in. The living room was mostly bookshelves and a sofa with stuffing trying to escape one armrest. A patchwork quilt her mother had made lay crumpled in the corner. She didn't mind the size, but lately, the walls had started to close in like they were shrinking with every rejection email and every day she didn't have a place to go in the morning. She pulled her damp dress over her head, folded it neatly, and changed into an oversized sweatshirt. Then she sat on the couch and stared at the dark window. For a while, all she could think about was the dance, how his hand had felt steady on her waist, how his eyes hadn't drifted, hadn't checked the room like everyone else's, how he'd listened, not just nodded, but listened when she spoke. And then the name, Grant Calloway. She didn't follow the business world much, but even she had heard of him. The youngest self-made multimillionaire in the Pacific Northwest, Calloway Equity, known for clean investments and low media presence, the kind of man whose face never needed to smile on a billboard because his influence did the talking. Why hadn't he said something? Why hadn't she asked? Kiara pulled a blanket over her lap and reached for her laptop. The screen flickered on, showing the same open document she'd been staring at for 3 days. A short story she couldn't finish, a paragraph that read like someone else had written it. She closed it. It wasn't the story she wanted to tell tonight. The next morning, Kiara made coffee the way she always did, 2 scoops of the cheapest ground blend from the corner store, a splash of almond milk, and a silent prayer it wouldn't taste like regret. She sat at the small round table near the window and scrolled through job listings. Again. Teaching jobs were scarce. Freelance writing gigs were even worse. Everything wanted a portfolio, a decade of experience, a social media following, and an ability to write 3 articles in 1 hour. She checked her bank account, and then she didn't want coffee anymore. Around 10, her phone buzzed. It was her mother's nurse, reminding her of the next appointment. Kiara scribbled it down on the notepad next to the fridge. Her mother had been moved into assisted living 6 months earlier, and Kiara still hadn't gotten used to how quiet her own place sounded without the hum of her mother's favorite jazz station. She poured the rest of the coffee down the sink. By mid-afternoon, she was at the local library, buried in a corner between fiction LM and magazines nobody read. It was one of the few places where time didn't press on her so hard. The smell of old books, the quiet shifting of pages, the distant click of keyboards comforting, familiar. She opened a new Word document, typed the words. The man didn't say his name, but he danced like he meant it, then deleted it. This was ridiculous. It had been one night, one dance, one passing spark between 2 people who were never going to share a morning cup of coffee, let alone a life. She leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. What was she doing? The world was full of people like Grant Calloway, charming, composed, untouchable, and people like her trying to find worth in rejection letters and late bills. No, she wasn't bitter, just tired. When she got home, there was a letter in the mailbox, a real one, handwritten. That alone made her pause. The envelope was cream-colored, no return address, her name written in tight, neat letters. Inside was a single card. You didn't know who I was, and that made everything real. If you ever want to talk, I'll be at Sycamore Books, Wednesday, 4 p.m. Just talk, nothing more. Grant. Kiara sat on the edge of her bed, the card held loosely in one hand. She read it again, then again. Part of her felt moved, seen. Part of her felt cornered. Why did he want to talk to her? What did he expect? What could she even say? Wednesday came too quickly. By 3:45, she was pacing the cracked sidewalk outside Sycamore Books, hands shoved deep into her coat pockets, trying to decide whether walking in was brave or just foolish. This was the part of the story where the girl either turns around and disappears forever, or walks in and asks for the ending she never thought she could have. At 3:58, Kiara opened the door. The bell above jingled softly, and there he was, sitting near the back, one leg crossed over the other, reading a paperback with a navy cover. No suit, no tie, just jeans and a charcoal sweater, but unmistakably him. He looked up and smiled. Not the charming, smooth kind of smile you give a crowd, but the kind you give a person, someone you've been hoping will show up. The smell of old wood and coffee lingered in the air at Sycamore Books, as it always did. The kind of scent that made Kiara Thompson feel like maybe time could be paused, if just for a little while. She stepped in quietly, brushing rain from her coat sleeve, her boots leaving faint damp prints on the wooden floor. The bookstore was small, cozy, and gently cluttered with character sunlight drifting through stained glass, jazz whispering from somewhere near the counter, and a cat curled on a velvet armchair like it owned the place. And there he was, Grant Calloway, seated at a back table by the window, paperback in hand, looking less like a business mogul and more like the man she'd danced with. His sleeves were rolled up, a half-full coffee cup beside him, and his eyes flicked up the second she entered. He smiled, not the kind of smile built for magazine covers or boardrooms, just a smile. Like he was genuinely glad she came. Kiara froze for a second longer than she meant to, then walked toward him slowly, her bag hugged close to her side. "Hey," she said. "Hi," he replied, standing up. "Thanks for coming." "I almost didn't." "I know," he said, without judgment. They sat across from each other. The space between them was small, but heavy. She stared at him for a moment, unsure where to begin. "So, Grant Calloway." He chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. "That's me. You're a lot quieter than your reputation. That's on purpose." She nodded, then glanced at the room, unsure how to phrase what was circling in her chest. "You should have told me," she said finally. "That night." He took a breath. "I know. I wasn't trying to hide, Kiara. I just didn't want it to be the first thing you knew about me." "Why not?" "Because it always changes things." She looked down at her hands, fingers curled tight around her coffee cup. "And what were you hoping would happen, that I'd fall for the man with no last name, and then you'd break the news after I'd already decided I liked you?" "No," he said quietly. "I wasn't hoping for anything. I was just trying to have one moment that didn't feel like a transaction." She didn't respond right away. From behind the counter, the soft whir of a milk steamer filled the space between them. "I've been poor most of my life," Kiara said finally, "and I've been lied to more times than I can count. So maybe I'm a little too quick to see silence as manipulation. I understand," he said, and to his credit, he didn't flinch. "But I also know," she added, her voice softer, "that I didn't walk across that ballroom to find a millionaire. I just saw someone who looked like he needed to dance as much as I did." Grant's expression changed. Something shifted in his jaw, something unguarded. For the first time since she sat down, he looked vulnerable. "Can I explain something?" he asked. "Depends how much corporate language it involves." He grinned. 0%. She raised an eyebrow. "All right then, go ahead." Grant leaned forward, elbows on the table. "My entire adult life has been built around control," he said. "Meetings, metrics, outcomes. I built a company from nothing. Kiara. I learned to read a room before I ever opened my mouth. I learned that people want what you can offer, not who you are." He looked at her then, really looked. "But you asked me to dance without knowing anything, and for the first time in, I don't even know how long, I felt like I could just be. No resume, no press releases, just me." Kiara blinked. She wasn't expecting honesty to feel like that, quiet, bare, steady. She didn't know what to say. So instead she asked, "Why here? Why this bookstore?" Grant smiled. "Because I Googled your name after that night. Found an old interview you did for the school paper. You mentioned this was your favorite place to write." She groaned. "God, that was from 5 years ago." "Still true?" he asked. She glanced around. The cat had shifted slightly. A child was giggling somewhere in the children's section. "Yeah," she said. "Still true. I wanted to meet you where you felt like yourself," he said. The words landed gently, but with weight, the kind that sticks in the chest. "I don't know what this is," Kiara said honestly, "or what you're expecting." "I'm not expecting anything," Grant replied, "but I'd like to get to know you, if you'll let me, as myself, not as Calloway equity." She studied him, the calm in his voice, the way he didn't lean too far in or try to persuade, and something softened in her. "I don't date billionaires," she murmured. "That's fine. I don't usually date brave women who challenge me in bookstores." A pause. Then she smiled. "Just a little." "You hungry?" she asked. He tilted his head. "Always." "There's a taco truck 2 blocks down. It's not fancy. Perfect." As they walked out, the rain had stopped. Seattle looked softer somehow, like the storm had passed, and the city hadn't quite decided what to do with the calm. She didn't reach for his hand, but she didn't walk far from him either. The taco truck had string lights and a faded blue awning, chipped at the edges like it had been through every season twice over. They ate outside, standing at a narrow wooden ledge under a street lamp. Grant ordered carnitas. Kiara chose something vegetarian and didn't eat much of it. It wasn't the food. It was the quiet hum of something beginning and her deep, familiar fear of what might come next. Later that night, Kiara lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The city hummed outside her window. She hadn't invited Grant up, hadn't even given him her number when they parted ways. It was with a smile and a vague, maybe I'll see you around, no promises, no next steps. And yet, her thoughts didn't let him go. He had been honest, or at least honest enough. He didn't try to impress her with wealth or fix anything. But that was the problem, wasn't it? He could fix things, with a phone call, a check, a signature. And Kiara. She had $238 in her account and an overdue phone bill sitting on the kitchen counter. She got out of bed, padded barefoot into the living room, and pulled open her laptop. The screen blinked to life, pale blue against the dark. She didn't check job listings. She opened a folder marked manuscripts, then another one inside that read, not ready. She clicked a document called When the Rain Fell Differently. It was her most personal story, one no one had read, about a woman who never let anyone stay because she was too tired of watching people leave. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. She didn't write. Instead, she closed the laptop and walked to the window. The next day, a letter arrived, handwritten again. I'm not trying to change your life. I just want to be in it, wherever you'll let me. Grant. No flourish, no ask, just that. She read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and slid it into her journal. 3 days passed before she called Linda. I need your opinion, Kiara said. That's never a good opener, Linda replied. What's going on? If someone was everything you swore you'd avoid, but also everything you didn't know you needed, what would you do? Depends. Are they emotionally available, or just rich and charming? He's both, I think. The dangerous type. Kiara sank deeper into the couch. I keep thinking it's a trap, like the second I let my guard down, I'll lose something. My sense of control, my independence. I don't know. Linda was quiet for a long time. Then she said, You don't have to marry him. Kai, you just have to decide if not trying feels worse than trying and getting hurt. That night, Kiara visited her mother. The assisted living home smelled like lavender and lemon cleaner. Her mother, once a music teacher, had once said, The saddest thing isn't making the wrong choice. It's never choosing at all. Kiara sat beside her, gently holding her hand. Her mother's eyes blinked slowly. She no longer remembered details, but she hummed when Kiara started speaking, as if the sound of her daughter's voice still mattered. When Kiara left the facility, it was raining again. She didn't rush. The rhythm of the drops against her coat, the glimmer of streetlights on wet pavement, it all felt strangely cinematic, like the city was waiting for her to make up her mind. She pulled out her phone, scrolled past texts, then stopped. Grant had sent one earlier that afternoon. No pressure, just tacos again sometime. I found a place that's slightly less sketchy. She typed, deleted, typed again. Then she hit send. I don't do someday, but I'll do tacos again. The next evening, they met at a food stall tucked inside an old brick warehouse turned indoor market. No candles, no orchestras, just long wooden tables, the scent of roasted garlic, and mismatched chairs. They ate, talked, laughed more than she expected. At one point, Grant said something about his college roommate that made her laugh so hard she snorted. He didn't flinch, just grinned, wide and real. She watched him across the table, his forearms resting casually beside his plate, sleeves rolled back, not a trace of performance in his posture. And for the first time, the ache in her chest loosened. She leaned in and said, Tell me something you've never told anyone. Grant hesitated. Then, when I was 14, I forged my dad's signature to audition for a school play. She blinked. You were in a play. Terrible one. I was awful. But for 5 minutes, standing on stage, I wasn't invisible. Someone clapped. I still remember the sound. Her smile softened. You ever act again? No, he said. I just turned my whole life into one. They sat with that truth for a while. Not every silence is awkward. Some are earned. As they left, the air had turned crisp, a hint of fall. Grant walked beside her, not touching, not rushing. When they reached her street, she stopped. "I'm still not sure about any of this," she said. He nodded. "That's fair. But," she added, "I don't want to walk away just because it's easier." "Then don't." She looked up at him. "I don't need fixing." "Grant, I don't want to fix you." "Then what do you want?" He smiled, soft and steady. "To keep showing up, until you believe I will." The first time Kiara Thompson invited Grant Calloway into her apartment, she did it without thinking. It was a Wednesday, late afternoon. She'd just gotten back from the library, hands full of secondhand books, one of which nearly slipped out of her arms and smacked her ankle. He had offered to walk her home, and for once, she hadn't protested. When they reached the front steps, she turned, keys in hand, and said, "I have coffee and a couch that doesn't entirely hate people." Grant smiled. "That sounds dangerously domestic." "Don't worry," she said. "It sinks in the middle. Nothing about it is permanent." Her apartment wasn't much, and she knew it. The floor creaked, the kitchen sink dripped. The artwork on the walls was mostly her own half-finished canvases and clipped poems she'd taped up for encouragement. But it was hers. And to her surprise, Grant didn't look out of place. He stepped inside, took a quiet look around, and said, "It smells like cinnamon in here, probably because I keep a jar of it open near the heater. Can't afford candles." "I like it," he said. She raised a brow. "You like heater cinnamon?" He laughed. "I like real things." They sat on the sagging couch. She poured them both coffee, no cream, just sugar and a chipped blue mug that had once belonged to her mother. He didn't flinch at the mismatched furniture, didn't scan the room, or seem uncomfortable with the close quarters. He sat back, long legs crossed, and sipped his drink like he'd done it 100 times. That settled something in her. "You look tired," she said after a moment. "I am," he admitted. "There's something exhausting about pretending to care about things that don't matter." She looked over at him, like mergers and conferences and boardroom banter. "Exactly. I had a 3-hour meeting today about a building I don't even like. So why not walk away?" Grant was quiet for a long moment. "Because I built it. And because walking away feels like failure when the world's watching." Kiara nodded. She understood that, maybe more than he knew. "You ever think about quitting?" he asked. "All the time," she said. "Writing feels like screaming into a canyon. You never know if anyone hears you. But you keep doing it. I guess I'm still waiting for the echo." As evening slipped in, they sat in the warm hush that only comes when two people have stopped trying to fill the air. Kiara reached for a book she'd left on the side table. "Have you ever read this?" she asked. Grant leaned closer. "The Long Goodbye, Chandler." "One of my favorites," she said. Not because of the plot, but because of the loneliness between the lines. He took the book from her hands and thumbed through the pages. "I get that," he said. "Some stories don't have to be loud to break your heart." They read side by side for a while, their shoulders almost touching. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting long amber streaks across the windows. At one point, Kiara got up to warm more coffee. Grant followed her into the kitchen, leaned against the counter like he belonged there. "You cook?" he asked. "I microwave," she replied. He grinned. "Fair enough." She passed him the mug, fingers brushing. It was so casual, so domestic, so not the world either of them was used to. And yet, it felt more intimate than anything money could have bought. Later, Grant stood near the door, coat in hand, hesitant. "I should go," he said. "You could stay," she offered quietly, almost to herself. He looked at her, carefully, respectfully. "No rush." He said, "I'll be here, when you're ready." She nodded. And that night, when she went to bed alone, she smiled into the darkness, not because she was falling in love, but because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't falling alone. Over the next few weeks, They slipped into a rhythm that didn't need defining. Afternoons at bookshops, evening walks through quiet neighborhoods, shared meals, some burnt, some brilliant. He took her to an art exhibit in a converted warehouse and spent most of the time asking what she thought about the pieces. She brought him to her favorite corner diner, where the waitress called her darling and the coffee tasted like cardboard. Neither of them tried to impress. They just were. One Sunday morning, Kiara woke to a soft knock at the door. Grant stood there, holding a brown paper bag and 2 coffee cups. "I brought muffins," he said. They were out of everything else. She blinked at him, hair a mess, sleep in her eyes. "I'm not really presentable." "You're perfect," he said simply. They sat cross-legged on her living room floor, passing crumbs back and forth, arguing about favorite movie endings and whether or not breakfast was better at midnight. And somewhere between coffee and laughter, Kiara looked over at him and thought, this is what I forgot I needed. Not grand gestures, not fancy dinners, just someone willing to meet her exactly where she was. And stay. The first article came out on a Monday morning. Kiara didn't see it at first. She was making oatmeal and humming to herself when her phone buzzed with a message from Linda. "Have you seen what they're saying about you?" Kiara blinked at the screen, spoon in hand. "What do you mean?" Linda replied with a screenshot. "Mystery woman. Spotted with billionaire Grant Calloway. Is she the one behind his recent withdrawals from the board below?" It was a photo, grainy, clearly zoomed in, but undeniably her and Grant, sitting outside Sycamore Books, coffee cups in hand, leaning close. The headline made it sound like she was some manipulative schemer, pulling the strings of a man worth more than she could imagine. Kiara's stomach dropped. The article was full of speculation. Zero fact. All implication. It hinted that Grant had become uncharacteristically distracted in recent weeks, that he'd stepped away from a major tech acquisition, that he'd been seen frequenting lower-income neighborhoods. She dropped the phone on the counter and backed away like it had burned her. Grant called an hour later. "I'm so sorry," he said, breath heavy through the receiver. "I didn't think it would hit this fast." "What is this?" she asked. "Boardroom politics. Paparazzi. It's a mess. I'm trying to get it taken down. Do you think I did this?" Her voice cracked. "Do you think I called them what? No. Kiara, no. I know you didn't. This is just what happens when people can't control a narrative. They make one up." There was silence on the line. Then she whispered, "I didn't sign up for this." "I know," he said softly. "I'm not made for this kind of attention. I didn't want this either. But you knew it could happen, and you brought me in anyway." By the afternoon, 3 more blogs had picked up the story. None of them had her name, but that didn't stop the comment sections from guessing. A Reddit thread labeled her the thrift store girlfriend. A finance blog asked, "Is Grant Calloway losing his edge?" The internet did what it always did. It chewed, spit, and moved on. But the marks it left stuck. That night, Grant came to her apartment. He looked worn out, not just tired, hollow. She didn't let him in right away, just stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "I'm sorry," he said again. "It's not just about you." "Grant," she replied, "they're tearing me apart, and I haven't done anything but drink coffee with you." "I can make this stop," he said. "But I need time. The press will lose interest once something bigger happens." "Until then," she asked. "I just hide no. We ride it out. Together." She shook her head. "You say that like you've had to live with your every breath being dissected. But I haven't. I'm not used to being a headline." His voice softened. "I know. I care about you," she said, voice breaking. "But I don't know if I can survive in your world." "Then let's make a new one," he said. She looked at him, this man with a million resources and no idea what it meant to feel exposed in all the wrong ways. She wanted to believe him, but all she could feel was the weight of eyes that didn't know her, judging her through warped glass. 2 days later, she received a hand-delivered envelope. Inside was an invitation, not from Grant, from Calloway Equity. A formal gala honoring Grant's philanthropic efforts, press expected, donors attending, black tie. She stared at the gold-trimmed paper like it was poison. He wanted her there, to stand beside him, to face the world that had already judged her. Linda came over that night. Kiara held the invitation with shaking fingers. "I can't do this," she said. "You don't have to," Linda replied. "If I don't go, I'm giving them what they want," Kiara murmured. "Proof that I'm not good enough for his world. But if you do go, I risk losing what's left of myself." Linda leaned forward, taking her hand. "Then maybe the question isn't, can you do this? It's, do you trust him to catch you if you fall?" Kiara swallowed hard. She didn't answer. She showed up that night, not because she was ready, but because she was tired of letting fear make decisions for her. Her dress was simple, deep green, with long sleeves, her hair in soft waves. She wore no diamonds, no designer heels, just herself. Grant spotted her the moment she stepped inside. He left the circle of executives without hesitation. "You came," he said, voice full of quiet awe. "I don't have any press training," she warned. "Good," he said. "That's why I wanted you here." The evening blurred. She smiled, nodded, shook hands. She stood beside Grant while cameras flashed. She answered polite questions with polite answers, but inside, she was shaking. It wasn't until a woman in a black satin gown leaned in and said, "You're braver than I thought," that Kiara truly faltered. "What do you mean?" Kiara asked. "I've known Grant a long time," the woman said, "but he's never brought someone who doesn't need him." Then she walked away. Later, when the ballroom emptied, Kiara stood alone on the terrace. Grant joined her quietly, handing her a glass of water. "I hate all of this," she said. "I know," he replied. "I don't want to be a story, Grant. You aren't. Not to me." She turned to him. "This can't be our life." "It doesn't have to be," he said. "But whatever comes next, I want it to include you." She looked out at the city lights, scattered like quiet promises in the dark. Then she said, "We'll see. Not yes, not no. Just not running." And for now, that was enough. Kiara didn't leave with a grand exit. There were no slammed doors, no teary speeches, no dramatic declarations. She left quietly, just before dawn, the morning after the gala, while the sky was still gray and the streets hadn't yet decided if they wanted to be loud or still. She packed a small duffel bag, just a few clothes, her journals, a framed photo of her mother, one worn paperback novel. She left a note on the kitchen table. "Grant, I need time. Not from you, just from this. From being watched, questioned, doubted. I need to remember who I was before everything became a headline. I don't know if this is goodbye. I just know it's necessary." She took a bus north, no flights, no drivers. Just 3 hours in a half-empty terminal that smelled like vending machine coffee and damp wool. Her sister Helen lived in a small coastal town called Bay Ridge, where the roads curved around pine trees and the ocean always sounded like it was whispering something just out of reach. Helen welcomed her with no questions, just open arms and an extra blanket. "You can stay as long as you need," she said. "We'll figure the rest out later." For the first few days, Kiara slept. And when she wasn't sleeping, she walked, down winding sidewalks, through quiet groves, past the bakery where the owner still scribbled prices in chalk, past the church where children's drawings lined the stained glass like sunbeams. No one knew her here. No one cared who she had danced with in a fancy hotel ballroom. It was a kind of freedom that felt like oxygen. Grant didn't call. At first, she was surprised. Then, relieved. He understood, at least that much. Instead, he sent one message every few days. Nothing demanding, just small check-ins. "Hope the ocean air's doing you some good. I passed your favorite food truck today. Thought of you. Still here, by the way. No headlines lately. Miss you." She didn't reply right away. Sometimes she didn't reply at all, but she read everyone. Meanwhile, she started helping out at the local library. The shelves were older than she was, and the catalog system still ran on index cards. But the kids there, most of them hadn't grown up with bedtime stories, so Kiara began reading aloud every Saturday. At first, it was just for 3 children, then 5, then 12. By the end of the month, she had a full room and a chalkboard that read, Miss Kiara's Story Hour. She smiled more than she expected, laughed harder than she remembered. But every night, when the world quieted, she missed him. One day, while cleaning out a donation box at the library, she found a book with a folded letter inside, typed, crisp, official-looking. It was from Calloway Equity, addressed to a small publishing house, a cover letter recommending a manuscript for acquisition, signed by G.C. There was a note in blue ink at the bottom. You once said your stories were never heard. I read this one. Twice. I thought maybe someone else should, too. Kiara stared at the paper, heart racing. The title at the top of the letter, When the Rain Fell Differently. Her manuscript. The one she'd buried. The one she never meant to show anyone. She left the library early that day. Walked straight to the cliffside, where the ocean cracked against the rocks and the wind roared like it was tired of being ignored. She stood there, letter in hand, and let the tears fall. Not because she was angry, but because he saw her even when she wasn't trying to be seen. Because he believed in a version of her she hadn't let herself believe in for years. That night, she finally replied, You found the only part of me I was afraid to share, and you didn't run. I'm coming home. She didn't expect him to be waiting, but when she stepped off the bus in Seattle, duffel in hand, there he was. No limo, no driver, just Grant. Leaning against a light post with 2 cups of coffee and the softest look she'd ever seen on his face. You look good, he said. I feel better, she replied. Bayridge suit you. It reminded me of who I am. And who's that? She smiled. Someone who wants more than safety. Someone who wants something real. He held out the coffee. I never stopped hoping you'd say that. She took it. Their hands brushed. She didn't let go. They walked in silence for a while, side by side, like they had that very first night after tacos and paper plates. Then Grant said, You didn't say goodbye. I wasn't ready, she admitted. Are you now? No, she whispered. But I'm willing. He nodded. That's more than enough. Kiara sat on the small stage at Bramble and Birch, an independent bookstore tucked between an herbal shop and a used record store on the quieter end of Pike Street. She had a microphone in front of her, a glass of water by her knee, and a stack of books with her name printed across the cover, Kiara Thompson, bold and unashamed. The chairs were filled, not just by strangers, but by people who'd come from far outside Seattle, teachers, aspiring writers, a few local kids from Bayridge, holding copies like they were clutching treasure. She didn't remember the first paragraph she read aloud. But she remembered her voice not shaking. Her book, When the Rain Fell Differently, wasn't flashy. It wasn't a thriller or a romance with neat bows and guaranteed happy endings. It was quiet, honest. A story about a woman who kept losing the people she loved because she never believed she deserved to be kept. When the applause faded, she looked up and saw him, Grant Calloway. He stood at the back, in the last row, not in a suit, not trying to be noticed, just there. His arms were crossed gently over his chest, and he was watching her like she was something he'd wished for a long time ago and finally found in his own backyard. They didn't talk until hours later, after the event ended, after the photos and the signing, and the woman who whispered, Your book made me call my daughter. Kiara found him by the window display, where a string of fairy lights wrapped around a tower of her paperbacks. She didn't say anything. Neither did he, not at first. Then, finally, I almost didn't come. She raised an eyebrow. Because you thought I didn't want you here. No, because I was scared I'd want more. And he smiled. I do. They walked outside together, where the air was crisp and the sidewalk was damp from rain. Do you remember what I said to you at the gala? Kiara asked, that this can't be our life? Yeah. He looked down, hands in his pockets. You were right, but I was also wrong, she said. He turned toward her. Kiara took a breath, steady and full. Because the truth is, I don't want a life that avoids discomfort. I want one that chooses what matters, even when it's messy, even when people whisper. Grant blinked. So where does that leave us? It leaves us here. She gestured between them, with a choice. He pulled something from his coat pocket, not a ring, not flowers. A folded letter, the one she'd left him on the kitchen table when she left. I read this every night, he said, holding it gently. Not because it made me feel better, but because it reminded me of how much you still needed to breathe. She nodded. I did. Do you still? She looked at the night sky above, the light from the bookstore windows behind her. No, she whispered. Now I want to exhale. With you. They stood in silence again, the kind that had always been their language. Finally, he asked, can I take you somewhere? Is it another rooftop gala? No. He smiled. It's quieter. They drove out of the city, past bridges and dark hills, past neon signs and quiet gas stations, until the pavement gave way to gravel, and Grant parked in front of a modest glass and cedar cabin, tucked beside a lake. Where are we? She asked. My mother used to bring me here, he said, before everything got loud. He opened the door and led her out onto a small wooden dock. The water below shimmered with moonlight, rippling gently like a second sky. I come here when I need to remember I'm not as important as I pretend to be, he said. She stepped to the edge of the dock, eyes closed, breathing in pine and earth and water. It's beautiful, she murmured. I want this to be part of our life, Grant said. Not because it's impressive, but because it's real. Kiara turned to him, heart steady in her chest. No press, no timelines, no defining what this has to be, she said. Only what it feels like. He agreed. She reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation. You once told me, she whispered, that you didn't want to be a transaction. He nodded. Well, she continued, you're the story I didn't think I'd get to write. That night, as they sat on the dock wrapped in one blanket, their feet dangling over water, Kiara leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in a very long time, they didn't wonder if they belonged. They just did. The lake was still when morning came. Kiara woke before Grant did. The blanket wrapped around both of them loose from sleep. The horizon was blushing pink, the kind of sunrise you don't try to capture on a phone because somehow the camera always misses the softness. She stood quietly, stretching her arms toward the sky, breathing in pine-scented air like it was medicine. Somewhere across the water, a loon called once, low and melodic. Inside the cabin, she made coffee. No milk, just sugar. Grant shuffled in not long after, hair tousled, still half dreaming. You always wake up this early, he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. Only when life feels like something I don't want to sleep through, she said. He smiled, and it was the kind that settled her completely. They spent the weekend away from the world, no schedules, no deadlines, no news feeds, just books and long walks, mismatched mugs and shared silence. She read him a few pages from the novel she had just started outlining. He told her about a project he'd been secretly funding, a local program to support arts education in underserved communities. I never liked the spotlight, he said, but I like building things no one else sees. She nodded. That's what writing feels like, too. By Sunday evening, they were back in Seattle, not because they had to, but because they were ready. Grant had left the city differently than he'd return, less guarded, less performative, more sure of who he was when no one was watching. Kiara walked into her apartment like it was hers again, not a stopgap, not a place to hide, but a place to begin. The books were still there, so was the chipped blue coffee mug. She held it in her hands for a moment, thinking of the girl who had clutched it months ago, wondering if she was too much or not enough. She smiled. She knew better now. They didn't move in together right away. There were no quick engagements, no sweeping declarations. Instead, they made a plan. A small one. Wednesday nights at her place, takeout and books. Sunday mornings at his, no phones, just long breakfasts and music on vinyl. They were two full people, choosing one another without needing to merge into something else. That, they decided, was more romantic than any fairy tale. The media eventually moved on. The articles faded, the whispers quieted. People always wanted a twist. But this wasn't a scandal. It was a slow burn. And slow burns don't sell headlines. Months passed. Kiara's second book went into editing. Grant started a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs who didn't come from wealth. They each kept their space, but more and more, their calendars started including each other's scribbled handwriting. One Tuesday, while they were grocery shopping. Grant looked down at the cart and said, "When did we start picking out tea like a married couple?" Kiara laughed. "Probably when you stopped pretending you didn't like chamomile." He grinned. "It's not bad. Don't tell anyone." She bumped her shoulder into his. The moment passed, ordinary and golden. One late fall evening, as they walked through Cal Anderson Park, bundled up in layers, Kiara asked, "Do you think it's possible to love someone too quietly?" Grant looked at her, considering. "I think real love is often quiet," he said, "but it doesn't mean it's weak. It's just steady." She nodded. "That's the kind I want." She said, "You have it," he replied, and she believed him. Not because he said it, but because he lived it. Months later, she received a letter in the mail, not from a publisher, not from a fan. It was handwritten, in loopy cursive, addressed simply to Kiara. "You don't know me, but I read your book in one sitting. My husband passed away last year. Your story didn't take away the pain, but it gave it a place to go. Thank you." That night, she cried softly on the balcony while Grant held her from behind, saying nothing. Because some things didn't need answers, just presence. 1 year after their first dance, they returned to the hotel ballroom. Same music, same chandelier. But this time, no secrets. Kiara wore navy blue. Grant, a tie he hated but wore because she liked the color. They didn't make an entrance. They just found each other on the dance floor when no one was watching. This time, she didn't ask. He simply held out his hand, and she said yes with her smile. They danced slowly, no spotlight, no music louder than the quiet rhythm of trust between them. She whispered into his ear, "Did you ever imagine it'd be like this?" He kissed her temple. "Not in 1,000 years," he said, "but I wouldn't change a thing." Sometimes, the most profound connections happen not when life is at its most polished, but when we're most real. Kiara and Grant's story reminds us that love isn't about perfection, status, or grand gestures. It's about presence, about showing up, especially when it's inconvenient, especially when we're afraid. As we age, we learn that what truly matters isn't how others see us, but how honestly we see ourselves. Kiara walked away, not out of pride, but to protect the parts of herself she hadn't yet learned to share. Grant didn't chase her with promises, he waited with quiet faith. From their journey, we're reminded that dignity and love are not opposites. You can hold your ground and still open your heart. You can start again, even after the world has tried to write your ending for you. So if you're still carrying old fears, or wondering if it's too late for something meaningful, know this: the right connection won't demand you become someone else. It will invite you to become more yourself than ever before. Because sometimes, the most beautiful chapter begins just when we think the story is done. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If it touched something in your heart, or reminded you of a moment in your own life, we hope you'll carry that feeling with you. If you'd like to hear more stories that speak gently but deeply, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling the kinds of stories that matter. Until next time, take care of your heart and take time to listen to others and to yourself.